Social stratification is a term used to describe social inequalities. It refers to a person's position in a stratified society. Social inequalities create a hierarchy of privileges in areas such as property, prestige, and power, and they may be evident between the groups recognized as the classes, the races, the genders, and nationalities, for example. Social inequality exists when people have unequal access to property, wealth, power, and prestige. Social stratification is the division between the rich and the poor, between dominant and minority groups, between the sexes, and between nations, for example. Social stratification translates to an unequal distribution of resources, goods, and services within and between societies. Sometimes this inequality is intentionally created, while other times it is an unintended consequence of social processes and relationships. Stratification can be understood in terms of equality. Standards of equality include ontological equality, which concerns the belief that everyone is created equal in the eyes of God. Equality of condition, which concerns the belief that all people should have the same starting point at which to pursue their goals. Equality of opportunity, which concerns the belief that equal opportunities for advancement make inequality of condition acceptable. Equality of outcome, which concerns the belief that everyone should have an equal distribution of rewards, regardless of opportunity, condition, etc. Stratification can take many forms. Philosophers and sociologists have identified ideal types of social classification. The estate system is politically based and is characterized by limited social mobility. The caste system is based on religious purity and is where stratification is hereditary. That is, one is born into a caste in which they remain for life. The class system is economically based and is characterized by loose social mobility. The status hierarchy system is based on social prestige. The elite mass dichotomy system has a governing elite and only a few leaders who broadly hold the power of society. Stratification is often defined in terms of socioeconomic status. There are many ways to determine socioeconomic status, including wealth, income, education, and occupation, for example. These measures reflect the characteristics of property, prestige, and power that a person holds. Property, prestige, and power combine to indicate a person's social class or socioeconomic status. Economic stratification exists when distinct strata or levels of economic condition, ownership of property, exist. There are differing views concerning the advantages and disadvantages of stratification. Each can be used to describe certain aspects of economic stratification. French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau believed that the private ownership of property creates inequality, which then leads to social conflict. Scottish philosophers Adam Ferguson and John Miller also believed that private property creates inequality, but they considered this inequality an advantage because the ability to accumulate assets provides incentive to increase production, which, in turn, leads to improved social systems and advancements in civilization. English philosopher Thomas Malthus was also in favor of inequality, but for a different reason. He believed inequality was a necessary means to prevent a population explosion that would contribute to degradation of the environment and eventual starvation and conflict between people. George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel believed that society consisted of master-slave relationships, where these classes were mutually dependent upon one another. He believed that over time, this relationship would eventually transform to a society of free individuals. Prestige, or social status, is subjective and depends on how a person is perceived by others. Prestige or social status can be categorized in many ways, including one's occupation, lifestyle, or membership in certain organizations, for example. An important category for sociologists is occupational status, and this is the category that is studied most often. Max Weber describes status as communities of people who are esteemed positively or negatively based on how society, as a whole, judges the lifestyle of the community. Power is the ability to get people to do what they otherwise would not do. Legitimate power, known as authority, is given to individuals willingly by others. Illegitimate power, known as coercion, is taken by force or threat of force. Power is associated with wealth and prestige, where greater wealth and/or prestige equates with greater power, and in turn, greater power allows for the increase in both wealth and prestige. Those with little wealth realize little prestige or power. Those with little prestige realize little wealth or power. Those with little power realize little wealth or prestige. Class is a term used to describe how society is grouped according to inequalities, such as that of property, income, or wealth, prestige or status, and/or property or authority. A person's class is their socioeconomic status. Karl Marx described society as being divided between two classes, the bourgeoisie, those who own the means of production or capital, and the proletariat, who are the hired workers. He had the belief that class was not based on the merits of individuals, but rather the role they played in society. He also believed that the bourgeoisie exploit the workers' labor. Max Weber describes society as being divided or gradated by class, based on grouping people according to the economic value of their property or labor in the marketplace. Eric Olin Wright describes society as being divided, but he realized that a person's status may not fit into only one category. He described this concept as contradictory class locations. The upper class are the economic elite at the top of the socioeconomic status hierarchy. In the United States, the upper class is associated with income, wealth, power, and prestige. Yet definitions of the upper class vary and may be related to specific levels of income or net worth, for example. Historically, the upper class was associated with the aristocracy and landowners, those who relied on rent and/or investments as their source of income and wealth. Lately, CEOs, celebrities, and government officials, successful professionals, for example, now fit into this social category. One who is born into a family that has wealth is offered opportunities of choice, is influenced positively by cultural capital, and benefits from social capital connections to a much larger degree than the lower classes. For this reason, the lower classes do not recognize the same level of opportunity and privilege that the upper class does. The United States is considered a middle-class nation, where almost 90% of Americans define themselves as being in the middle class. The middle class has historically been composed of white-collar workers, yet members of today's working families consider themselves to be middle class. Definitions vary according to social hierarchy. That is, the middle class is between the rich upper class and the lower classes. Other definitions of middle class consider occupations and values, like middle class values or principles. Economically speaking, over the years, the gap between the rich and the poor is increasing, and the middle class is slowly disappearing. After the economic boom of World War II, the working class merged with the middle class due to higher wages and economic policy that encouraged higher education, home ownership, and savings for retirement. This helped the lower class to gain wealth that comes with property ownership, cultural capital, and social capital that is necessary for upward mobility. Unlike the more fluid definitions of the upper classes, poverty has an official government definition. Sometimes a distinction is presented between the deserving working poor and the undeserving non-working poor, those who are disabled or otherwise unable to work. The working poor are, many times, seen as deserving assistance, while the non-working are seen as undeserving. Groups at this level of socioeconomic status tend to move in and out of poverty throughout their lives. Poverty does not offer much in the way of property, privilege, or power, and it can be very difficult for a person at this level to gain the property, prestige, and power to realize upward mobility. Thoughts and ideas concerning the social construct of race differ from place to place and have evolved and have even been redefined over time. Biological differences, or traits such as skin color, hair texture, and body structure, vary among individuals, and this is how race is generally understood and defined. Yet although physical traits are inherited, there is no common set of traits particular to any one race. There is a greater variation between individuals of a race than between different racial groups. Differences between people are the result of the environment and of change over time. Yet one's race is an important feature of one's identity because race is a symbol and part of one's identity. People use the concept of race to classify and sort who are the most intelligent, most spiritual, and most human, which race is best and which race is worst, for example. The ideas of race, people's opinions, perspectives, and viewpoints are cultural and social constructs that folks use to define themselves and others. Notions of race are used by dominant groups to label others and to construct and maintain oppressive class and power structures at both individual and systemic levels. Defined sociologically, the term race is used to describe a set of characteristics, typically but not always physical ones, and are said to share a common bloodline. Although there is no biological basis in our notions of race, one's race can have a major impact on one's life. In the U.S., white is the default race to which all other races are compared. This allows for a system of privileges, white privilege, that are designed to benefit this majority and controlling group. Historical racist and discriminatory practices resulted in a stratified society that still persists today, in spite of the fact that numerous laws, such as the many Civil Rights Acts, and policies, such as affirmative action, have been enacted and put into practice. The circumstance remains that there is a hierarchy in socioeconomic status that is correlated to race, where the white population as a group dominates the top socioeconomic status level, and all other races remain in a position somewhere below. Gender is the term that is used to refer to the set of socially constructed and socially transferred ideas and ideals concerning biological sex categories of male bodies or female bodies. Gender is the set of rules that society assigns to male bodies and female bodies. Notions of a masculine male violence and male domination, opposed to a feminine female weakness and female submission, are dominant in Western society, yet they are not universal. These notions are socially constructed and are passed on consciously and subconsciously through a process of socialization. Current hegemonic forces shape and maintain a position of masculine power through actions that should be recognized as forms of bullying and harassment. Masculinity dominates as the social norm in Western society, where folks who identify with any other ideas concerning gender are marginalized and or stigmatized. Understanding that gender is a process, rather than a social identity associated with specific bodies, allows us to think more inclusively concerning the many forms of identity. Understanding beyond the stereotypical binary gender system, consisting of dominating males and masculinity and opposition to submissive females and femininity, that the dismantling of hegemonic power and domination will take place. Although gender is a social construct, one's gender also has a major impact on one's life. Gender inequality exists in many areas of society, and is especially apparent in schools and the workplace, where boys and girls and women and men are treated differently. Difference can exist in the expectations that are placed on a person according to their gender, the likelihood of discriminatory or harassing behaviors, and wage inequality. This translates to the fact that, as a group, men dominate the top of the hierarchy in realizing benefits of property, privilege, and power, while women, as a group, fall somewhere below. There are numerous reasons why national inequalities exist, ranging from differences in geography and the natural environment, difference in economic and public policies, and the forces of globalization, for example. Yet the reality is that there are increasing social inequalities between nations, much like what exists between the classes, the races, and the genders within nations. Western nations, those that consist of Western Europe, and those that have been influenced by Western European culture and ideology, such as the U.S., are considered masculine in nature. And these Western nations are the ones that maintain a privileged position of property, prestige, and power in the hierarchy of world affairs. Social stratification can exist at many levels within and between societies. Inequalities of property, prestige, and power exist between different categories of people, such as class, race, gender, and or nationality. This results in an unequal distribution of resources, goods, and services within and between societies. Sometimes people can realize advantage of being a member of one group while realizing disadvantage in being a member of another. The process that result in social inequalities may or may not be intentionally created. This presentation was prepared for the class Exploring Society, taught by Dr. Alicia Stanley at Empire State College the summer of 2013, and has been prepared by Nancy Babbitt.